Game day to be here for one of the great classics of this new entree of Syracuse being in the ACC, especially with Duke coming here and having, some 36,000 tickets gone. We're excited to be back. Obviously, we go to Duke. Actually, we'll be there for the Carolina at Duke weekend, the end of the year for game day. I think this is our third trip to Syracuse. Year one, we were here, and then about 4 or 5 years ago. You're seeing two teams that it's been amazing to see if Coach Boeheim, whose father was an undertaker, as my father was an undertaker, except I got the nickname Digger and he slipped by it. Actually, my dad went to the Simmons School of Embalming up here at Syracuse, where I was supposed to go back in '63. But that summer when I got out of Rider College in Trenton, New Jersey, in between funerals, I started coaching in the summer league, and then I delayed embalming school. But I feel this way. When we've played here, obviously, Boeheim and I had an agreement. You beat me twice in South Bend, I'll beat you twice in a dome. And that's how it worked out. But to play here under these conditions, this atmosphere is one of the great ones. It really is. And the fans are so loyal. That's what I love about Syracuse. And yet, Duke coming in, probably a new Duke team the last 2 weeks. Because as I was at the game at Notre Dame, when the Irish beat them 44 to 16 points in the paint. They just spread the floor, drove on them, get pounded inside, or just drive and score. Duke has rediscovered itself, especially its last two games. Now hitting the glass and doing a great job. How about 49 points on offensive rebounding in the last two games, and then obviously points off turnovers. So they're playing more aggressive. Their defense is better, and they're hitting the glass. I think that'll be an issue for Syracuse, especially playing a zone. You just can't ball watch a shot or get in position, because if they're going to sneak by, that could be an issue. Yet at the same time, I love the way Syracuse is brought along their freshman, Tyler Ennis. Go back to the first game here with Brooklyn College, 2-point win. Well, he's learning the game. He's learning his teammates, and he's learning the flow of not just the zone, but also how to run the offense. But obviously, since that time, one of the great highlights the other night at Wake Forest is when all of a sudden they trap the one corner and he steals that pass to the opposite baseline because he anticipated the pass, and here we go, transition points. But from that standpoint, I thought that, with C.J. Fair and Grant and Cooney, they've brought in this young freshman along to, hey, this is your team. You got to run it, even though you're a freshman. And it's funny, I was just talking to Jerry McNamara outside, knowing him from way back. But he went, what's the big guy, Derek Coleman, when they were freshmen, of course, and what they did in their careers. But Jerry Mack having those 5 great games in the Big East tournament where, he just gets it done for them to get an NCAA bid and go. I said to him, Jerry, if I was still coaching at Notre Dame, those buses wouldn't have been going from Wilkes-Barre to Syracuse. They've been going to Wilkes-Barre to South Bend on weekends. But more importantly, I just feel that both these teams, it's going to be an interesting matchup tomorrow. And from that standpoint, it's going to be a battle of the point guards. I think Quinn Cook's going to run Duke, and that's what his job description is. Tyler's got to run Syracuse. That's what his job description is. But I think the X factors to me will be Grant. He's got to do his thing. If he gets, his 12 and 9, he's doing his job. CJ, it'll be interesting to see. I'm anxious to see this because what Duke did the other night at Pittsburgh, Lamar Patterson last Saturday at Maryland scored like 28 points. So Rodney Hood played him Monday night in Pittsburgh, and he goes 4 for 14. The question is Hood going to guard C.J. Fair? I'm looking to see if that's going to be a matchup because that could be very interesting. But I just feel that Syracuse is a team of spurts. They just find ways to make those runs. You take the Miami game here, it was a 14-4 spurt to end that game. The game in Miami, it was a 15-3 run at the end to win that game. So they find ways to come at you sooner or later where they just wear you down, even if you had a lead, as both those teams did, both the Miami games. But Duke on the other side of it, now that they're playing more aggressive on the glass and more aggressive defensively, get points off turnovers, it's going to be interesting to see how this thing, fans out. But obviously with 36,000 people here. And I find it interesting because even when I coached here, the crowd noise was always above you. You could always talk to your players. It wasn't like a distraction. Yes, the place was rocking, it was roaring, but the crowd noise was always above the bench line. That's just my experience coaching here twice. So I think that is why you'll see Boeheim make adjustments, Coach K make adjustments, and you got, here's two guys that won 900 games in college basketball at one school, and there's Coach K saying, to Bayham, I want you to become an assistant Olympic team, because I think against some of these international teams we got to play that 2-3 zone, and that's his MO, and that's what it comes down to. So from that standpoint, this game should be a classic. We're excited to do it, and then obviously excited to have game day here to have the students go crazy, and we'll just see what happens to see. To me, as you look down the road and what's going to go on this year in college basketball, I don't think Jim's so much worried about going undefeated. I don't think Arizona is either. I think it's what do we do come March? Are we healthy, number one, and do we have the mindset? Because to me, the most important thing is, think about it, college basketball started November 8th. Now here it is, the national championship games April 7th. The season's 2 weeks longer. You go to the middle of March, here's championship week. Well, the middle of March used to be the first, second rounds. So the most important thing is once you get into February, especially the middle of February, it's how do you give them the mental rest and how do you give them the physical rest so that you stay healthy and get ready not just for championship week, but obviously March Madness. And we saw how Boeheim, to me, last year gets to the Final Four and, knocking off the number 1 seed Indiana. So from that standpoint, I just feel this year it's more wide open than ever as far as teams getting to the Final Four based on what we're seeing out there right now.
Digger, this maybe not so much X's and O's question, but talk to me about the difference between doing analysis in the studio versus doing a game day with all those crowd, whether it's here, whether it's at Duke, whether it's somewhere else.
No, I think, well, when we do our show, we're discussing a lot of issues in college basketball. It's not just about the game. Mm-hmm. That may be, we'll talk about that total maybe 20 minutes, if that. 10 minutes in the 10 o'clock show, 10 minutes in the 11 o'clock show. It's what else is going on. As an example, what's wrong with the Big Ten? Here's Ohio State and Wisconsin, both ranked in the top 10. Whoops, are they playing themselves out of an NCAA bid? We look at the Big 12, Baylor's collapse. Okay, who's in second place right now? Oklahoma. So, it's the whole nation, what we're looking at and why, and I think that's what makes the Game Day show so interesting, because we're giving the college fans around the country some insight to what's happening all around. And by the way, Duke Syracuse tonight, big game.
Different vibe, different energy, though, being here versus a studio?
Well, game day's become, everybody wants us. And like next week, we got Gonzaga at Memphis, a big game. Next week, we got Florida at Kentucky. The next week, we got Arizona at Colorado. We made that choice. Then we finished with a payback game because Kansas won by 2 against Oklahoma State. Well, we're doing game day there the 7th week, the first weekend of March, with Kansas going back to Oklahoma State. And then, of course, finally it's Carolina-Duke, which has always been a tradition. No matter how bad they are, throw the records away, let's play the game, because those two schools obviously are a great part of the history of college basketball. So, like Knight and I did the game the other night with Virginia, who I think, by the way, you talk about ACC, there's the hottest team playing right now. Ever since they got embarrassed at Tennessee, and obviously Wisconsin beat them like 48-38 earlier in the year. They reinvented themselves, and it's been with their defense, Joe Harris and company. And they are 7-1, and their only loss was at Duke when they're up 1 with 38 seconds. Then all of a sudden, some guy named Suleiman hits a big 3 with 18 seconds, and Duke wins the game. But to me, Virginia has reinvented themselves. They started with their defense, and it's led to them being a better offensive team. So when I look at teams out there and discussion and what's happening and why, I just think that this whole season is going to be I look at Wichita State right now. They may run the table. Well, we saw what happened last year when Gonzaga gets a number 1 seed in the West, and they lose to Wichita State in the NCAA tournament. So for them to get back, so to speak, to the Final Four could be a little tough, because the schedule's not going to help them play some tough games. Like, I respect the fact that Gonzaga this year is going to go into Memphis and play them. And then what's that do? It helps them, especially this time of the year. The teams that aren't afraid to play non-conference teams, well, Georgetown playing at Michigan State, I think Georgetown's got some issues. But still, to step out of your conference, what's that do? Gives you some flavor for what else is going on with other conferences around the country, and what else is going on for things that we may not see because our conference has certain trends. Now we get something that's, let's get ready for that, because we may face that in March.
Last question, guys.
You mentioned some of the collapses in the Big Ten and such. How impressive does it make it that Syracuse has avoided that? Because they could have lost 3, 4, 5 even somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and we look down the road, they got to go back to Duke. That'll be interesting. They got to go back to Pitt, and that's a payback game, So from that standpoint, and I don't think that bothers, even if they lose, say, the next 3, which I don't think is going to happen. when I say those three, twice with Duke and one with Pitt on the road. The fact that Pitt played so well here gives Pitt the confidence, okay, let's go get it done. I think it's more important to make sure that any weaknesses become strengths. And any strengths you have, get them stronger. But the most important thing to me is keep them fresh-minded. Give them a day off. Practice. Okay, we're only doing 40 minutes. Okay, they think we're going an hour and a half. No, we're going to shoot for 20, go on home. To keep in mind, like, you gotta just keep them sharp because of the burnout syndrome mentally. And it was funny. Remember when Kelly got hurt last year for Duke and he missed about, 3 or 4 weeks? His first game back, he had about 30. He just said, hey, I'm fresh. I'm ready to go again. And I think that's what coaches try to do, especially when you're trying to get ready for March Madness. But what I'm going to find interesting this year, and we'll see how it fans out. What was interesting last year, 2 football stadiums, 2 NBA courts for the regionals. Okay, so when Kansas and Michigan got to Atlanta, it was their 3rd game in a dome stadium. And even though Syracuse plays in a dome, you just play 2 games in an NBA court. Here comes what I say, dome factor. Shooting percentages go down, and the 2 teams that played their 3rd game get to the final, Michigan and Kansas. The other 2 teams lose. So that's always interesting in that scenario when you look at the dome factor.